The motion sensor. I'm a novelist, which is a polite way of saying I'm good at procrastinating until a deadline looms so large it threatens to swallow me whole. That's the situation I found myself in last autumn. With a manuscript due in 2 weeks and a word count that was laughably behind schedule, I knew I had to take drastic measures. The city was a cacophony of distractions, friends, traffic, the alluring siren song of my television. I needed absolute isolation. I found a cabin online that looked perfect. It was nestled deep in the mountains, a good 2-hour drive from civilization, and, according to the listing, had no Wi-Fi and spotty cell service. It was advertised as a writer's retreat. The photos showed a cozy, wood-paneled interior, a stone fireplace, and a small porch overlooking a dense forest. I booked it for 10 days, packed my laptop, a box of non-perishable food, and drove away from my life. The first few days were blissfully productive. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire, the tapping of my keyboard, and the rustling of wind through the pines. The owner, a man named Gerald, who I'd only spoken to over the phone, had mentioned one quirk of the cabin. "The motion sensor light on the back porch is a bit finicky," he'd said with a chuckle. "Goes off for any old squirrel or deer that wanders by. Don't mind it." And he was right. The first couple of nights, the powerful floodlight would periodically snap on, bathing the backyard in a harsh, white glare for about 30 seconds before clicking off again. I'd glance out the window, see nothing, and assume it was just the local wildlife, as Gerald had said. It was a minor annoyance, but nothing more. By the 4th night, a pattern began to emerge. The light didn't just go on randomly. It clicked on at exactly 11:47 p.m., then again at 12:47 a.m., and again at 1:47 a.m. The precision was unsettling. I'd stop typing, my heart thumping in my chest, and stare out the window into the blinding light. The backyard was just a small patch of muddy ground before the trees began. There was never anything there. Not a deer, not a raccoon, not even a shadow that seemed out of place. After the light clicked off, plunging the yard back into impenetrable blackness, I'd be left with the disquieting feeling of being watched. The next day, I tried to investigate. I walked out back, my boots sinking into the soft, damp earth. I looked for tracks, for any sign of an animal large enough to trigger the sensor. I found nothing. Not a single print. I looked up at the sensor itself, a white plastic dome mounted above the back door. It looked ordinary. I thought about trying to disable it. But it was hardwired into the wall, and I remembered Gerald's specific instruction: don't mess with the wiring. That night, the dread started early. I found myself watching the clock, my productivity gone, just waiting. At 11:47 p.m., right on schedule, click. The yard was illuminated. I pressed my face against the cold glass of the window, scanning every inch of the lit area. Nothing. The light went out. An hour later, 12:47 a.m., click. Again. Nothing. It felt like a form of psychological torture. The light wasn't revealing a threat. The light was the threat. It was a signal, a reminder. I'm here. I tried to rationalize it. A faulty timer. An electrical short that happened to occur on a precise schedule? It all seemed too convenient. I called my friend Sarah, managing to get a single bar of service by standing on the porch railing. "You're just spooking yourself," she said, her voice crackling. "It's an old cabin in the woods. Of course it's creepy. You've been watching too many horror movies." As she was saying this, at 1:47 a.m., the light clicked on. I gasped. It just happened again. Right now. "See? It's just a thing it does," she said, completely missing the terror in my voice. "Just ignore it." Write your book and get out of there." The 8th night was the worst. A storm had rolled in, and the wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Rain lashed against the roof. Around midnight, the power went out. The cabin was plunged into a terrifying, absolute darkness and silence, save for the storm. I lit a few candles, my hands shaking, and tried to tell myself it was fine. At least the cursed light wouldn't go on now. I was wrong. At 12:47 a.m., through the din of the storm, I heard it. Click. The motion sensor was on a battery backup. The backyard was once again bathed in that sterile white light. The contrast between the pitch-black cabin and the brightly lit yard was horrifying. It felt like I was in a dark theater, and the curtain had just risen on a stage where something terrible was about to happen. A surge of desperate anger finally eclipsed my fear. I was done being a prisoner to a faulty light. I grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker, my knuckles white, and strode to the back door. I was going to go out there and smash that sensor to pieces. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my heart hammering against my ribs. I swung the door open and stepped onto the porch, raising the poker. The light illuminated the falling rain, making it look like a cascade of silver needles. It lit the muddy ground and the first few feet of the forest, and it lit the thing that was making it turn on. It was standing just outside the sensor's effective range, almost completely hidden by the darkness of the trees. It was tall, impossibly thin and skeletal, with limbs that were far too long for its body. It was contorted into a grotesque, unnatural posture, hunched over so it could extend one long, stick-like arm into the lighted area. At the end of its arm was a single, elongated finger, which it held perfectly still about a foot off the ground, directly under the sensor. It wasn't trying to get in. It wasn't moving towards me. It was just standing there, holding its finger in the light's path, deliberately triggering it. It had been doing this every hour, just to let me know it was there. As I stood there, frozen, its head slowly tilted to the side. It had no face, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin. Then the light clicked off. I screamed and scrambled back inside, slamming and locking the door. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the windowless bathroom, the fireplace poker held tight against my chest, listening to the storm and waiting for the telltale click that would mean it was still out there, patiently reminding me. I left at the first hint of dawn, not even bothering to pack my things. I just got in my car and drove, and I didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky. 2. The rules of the house. My sophomore year of college, I was broke. Not I should skip Starbucks this week, broke. But I'm seriously considering the nutritional value of ketchup packets, broke. So when I saw a flyer on a campus bulletin board advertising a house-sitting gig for 2 weeks at $100 a night, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The ad was simple. Responsible student needed to house sit. Must be clean, quiet, and good at following instructions. I called the number immediately. The owner was a man named Mr. Alistair. He interviewed me in a coffee shop, and he was exactly what you'd expect from someone with a house that required a paid sitter. He was older, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, and had a demeanor that was both polite and intensely serious. He explained that he was a collector of rare antiques and was leaving for an acquisitions trip to Europe. He needed someone to stay in the house to deter burglars and perform a few simple tasks. It sounded too good to be true. The house itself was a sprawling Victorian mansion in the city's oldest, wealthiest neighborhood. It was beautiful but imposing, with a wrought iron fence and shadowed windows that looked like eyes. When Mr. Alistair gave me the tour, I felt like I'd stepped into a museum. Every room was filled with antique furniture, grandfather clocks, and oil paintings with subjects whose eyes seemed to follow you. As he was preparing to leave for the airport, he handed me a single, typewritten sheet of paper. "This is a list of your duties and a few house rules," he said, his tone leaving no room for questions. "Please, read them carefully and follow them to the letter. It is very important." I glanced at the list. Most of it was standard. 1. Water the ferns in the conservatory every other day. 2. Collect the mail from the mailbox by 5 p.m. 3. Do not touch any of the clocks. They are on automated winders. 4. No guests are permitted inside the house. 5. Take out the trash on Wednesday night. 6. The West Wing is locked for insurance purposes. Do not attempt to enter. It was the last 3 rules that gave me pause. 7. After 10 p.m., do not look directly onto any mirrors for more than a few seconds. 8. If you hear the sound of a music box playing, go immediately to the master bedroom, close and lock the door, and do not leave for 1 full hour. Do not make any noise. 9. Never, under any circumstances, open the small, unmarked door at the end of the upstairs hallway. I wanted to ask about them, to laugh them off as the eccentricities of a rich old man, but Mr. Alastair's grave expression stopped me. He just looked at me and repeated, "To the letter, my dear. It's for your own well-being." The first few nights were uneventful. I did my chores, studied in the enormous library, and felt like royalty. The rules seemed silly. I consciously avoided mirrors after 10 p.m., but I felt ridiculous doing it. I heard no music box. The little door at the end of the hall remained shut. On the 4th night, I was brushing my teeth in the master bathroom a little after 10. The mirror was huge and ornate. I glanced at my reflection and then remembered the rule. As I looked away, out of the corner of my eye, I could have sworn my reflection didn't move with me. It felt like it stayed looking at me for a split second longer than it should have. I told myself I was tired. My eyes were playing tricks on me. The music box started on the 9th night. I was reading in the living room when I heard it, a faint, tinny melody drifting down from upstairs. It was a simple, childlike tune, like something from a ballerina jewelry box. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My heart leapt into my throat. Rule number 8. I shot up from the couch and sprinted up the grand staircase. I ran into the master bedroom, slammed the heavy oak door, and turned the old-fashioned skeleton key in the lock. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, my entire body trembling. I strained my ears. The music box sound had stopped, but it was replaced by something else, a soft, dry, scratching sound. It was coming from the hallway, right outside the bedroom door. It sounded like fingernails being dragged slowly across the wood. It went on for what felt like an eternity. I huddled there, counting the seconds, until my phone alarm told me a full hour had passed. The scratching had stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to unlock the door. The hallway was empty. There were no marks on the door. I was a wreck for the rest of the gig. I barely slept. I ate my meals in the master bedroom and only left when I had to. I was counting down the hours until Mr. Alastair's return. On my final night, I had my bags packed and sitting by the front door, ready to leave the second the sun came up. I just had to make it through a few more hours. I decided to do one last walkthrough to make sure everything was in order. As I walked down the upstairs hallway, my blood ran cold. The small, unmarked door, the one from rule number 9, was slightly ajar. A thin crack of blackness in the white wall. I know I should have walked away. I know I should have run out of that house and never looked back. but 2 weeks of simmering fear and unanswered questions had fermented into a morbid, reckless curiosity. What was so important about this one little door? My hand was shaking as I reached out and pushed it open. The room inside was small and square, no bigger than a closet. It was completely bare. No furniture, no windows, nothing. Except for the walls. Every single inch of the 3 walls was covered in mirrors. Small hand mirrors, large dresser mirrors, round, oval, and square mirrors, all hung at odd angles. And in every single one of them, my reflection was staring back at me. But it wasn't me. It was a twisted, distorted version of me. Its smile was too wide, its eyes were too dark. And as I stood there, frozen in the doorway, every single one of my reflections began to take a coordinated, fluid step forward, right out of the glass. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat. I slammed the door shut, the sound of dozens of bare feet hitting the wooden floor echoing from inside. I didn't wait. I bolted down the stairs, out the front door, and ran down the street without looking back. I left my bags, my textbooks, and the check Mr. Alistair had left for me on the kitchen counter. I never went back, and I never told anyone why. Some rules, I learned, are not meant to protect the house. They're meant to protect you from what's inside it. 3. Mr. Abernathy's garden. When my parents passed away, the task of cleaning out my childhood home fell to me. It was a bittersweet, dusty job, each packed box unleashing a fresh wave of memories. I remembered scraped knees, birthday parties in the backyard, and the long summer afternoons of my youth. And I remembered Mr. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy lived in the house next door. He was a recluse, a shadowy figure we kids only ever saw as a silhouette in his window or a stooped shape shuffling through his yard at dusk. He was the boogeyman of our neighborhood, the subject of all our ghost stories. His house was old and peeling, but it was his garden that was the source of our terrified fascination. His lawn was a jungle of overgrown weeds and untamed bushes, but scattered throughout the chaos were dozens of lawn ornaments. There were chipped garden gnomes, a flock of pink plastic flamingos bleached pale by the sun, a rusty scarecrow slumped over on its post, and several strange, vaguely humanoid statues made of concrete. The neighborhood legend, whispered between kids on sleepovers, was that Mr. Abernathy's statues weren't just statues, they moved. We'd dare each other to stare at his yard, to try and catch one of them in the act. We'd swear we saw a gnome turn its head, or a flamingo take a small step. Of course, no adult ever believed us. Now, as a man in my 30s, I stood at my parents' kitchen window, looking out at that same yard. Mr. Abernathy had died years ago, and a cheerful young family with 2 small kids now lived in his house. They had cleaned up the yard, planted flowers and mowed the lawn. It looked normal, respectable, but I couldn't shake the old childish feeling of dread. One afternoon, while clearing out the attic, I found a box of my old things. Inside was a sketchbook from when I was about 9 years old. I flipped through the pages, a nostalgic smile on my face, until I found a section of drawings that made my blood run cold. They were all pictures of Mr. Abernathy's garden. Under a crude drawing of a gnome, I had scribbled, "His eyes followed me today." Beneath a picture of the scarecrow, it said, "He waved." It wasn't just a memory of a silly story. It was documented in my own childish handwriting. A few days later, I was chatting with Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who had lived across the street for 50 years. I mentioned I was cleaning out my parents' house. "It's a lot of work," she said, leaning on her walker. The young couple that moved into the Abernathy place found that out. Had to hire a crew to clear out all the junk in that yard. I remember all those statues he had, I said. Mrs. Gable's face clouded over. Oh, the strangest things they were. The clean-up crew said they weighed a ton each, solid concrete. But the weirdest part, she lowered her voice, is that they told the new owners that the statues were all warm, like they'd been sitting in the sun, even the ones they dug up from the shady parts of the yard. Warm to the touch in the middle of October. Isn't that odd? The final night I was there, I was in the attic, packing the last few boxes. It was late, well past midnight. I paused to stretch my back and glanced out the small, circular attic window. It provided a perfect bird's-eye view of the backyard next door. The new family had installed a powerful security floodlight, and the entire yard was lit up in stark detail. My eyes were drawn to a single, cheerful garden gnome they had placed by their new rose bushes. It was a new one, brightly painted, with a pointy red hat and a fishing pole. As I watched, my breath caught in my throat. The gnome's head, ever so slowly, turned on its little ceramic neck. It tilted upwards until its painted black eyes were looking directly at the attic window where I stood. Then it raised its tiny hand, the one not holding the fishing pole, and gave a slow, deliberate wave. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering. It was real. It had all been real. I forced myself to look again, hoping, praying it was a trick of the light, of my tired mind. The gnome was still staring up at me. And then, from the deep shadows at the far edge of the property line, where the floodlight didn't quite reach, another figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, made of burlap and straw. The old scarecrow. I thought it had been thrown away. It, too, turned its lumpy, faceless head towards my window. I realized then what Mr. Abernathy was. He wasn't just a collector of lawn ornaments. He was a keeper, a zookeeper of sorts. And when he died, his collection was simply left to wait. I didn't spend another night in that house. I hired a company to clear out the rest, and I sold it for less than it was worth, just to be rid of it. I live in a high-rise apartment in the city now, miles away from any gardens. But sometimes, late at night, when I look out my window at the city lights below, I can't help but wonder